Hi, friends. Today is the last section of James and the Giant Peach, and I'm so glad that you made it all the way to the end. It makes my heart so happy to think that you listened to this story, even though we could not be together in class. Thank you so much. All right, friends, in today's chapter, we're going to continue where we left off. And did you wonder to yourself, how in the world are James and his friends going to get down? I wondered to myself too. Let me show you what the Empire State Building looks like with the peach on top. There it is. Now, Roald Dahl wrote this book in 1961. That was about 59 years ago. 59 years ago, the Empire State Building was the tallest building in the world. It was only surpassed in 1970 by the World Trade Tower. Do you remember when we talked about that? And we talked about, if you were there on September 11th in class, we talked about Philippe Petit and how he walked between the two towers. He was the tightrope walker who walked between the twin towers. Those are the towers that beat the Empire State Building's record for height. The Empire State Building is about 1,200 feet tall, and the One World Trade Center, which took the place of the Twin Towers, is about 1,776 feet tall. And isn't that a significant number? Do any of you know what happened in 1776? We gained our independence from England. Oh, some fun facts. So, anyway, when this story was written, the Empire State Building was the tallest in the world. It really was an amazing sight, and in 2 or 3 minutes, as soon as the people below realized that this now couldn't possibly be a bomb, they came pouring out of the shelters and the subways to gape at the marvel. The street for half a mile around the building was jammed with men and women, and when the word spread that there were actually living things moving around on top of the great round ball, everyone went wild with excitement. "It's a flying saucer," they shouted. "They're from outer space." "They're meant for Mars," or maybe they came from the moon. And a man who had a pair of binoculars to his eyes said, "They look pretty peculiar to me, I'll tell you that." Police cars and fire engines came screaming from all over the city and pulled up outside the Empire State Building. 200 firemen and 600 policemen swarmed into the building and went up in the elevators as high as they could go. Then they poured out of the observation roof, which is the place where the tourists stand, just at the bottom of the big spike. And when you go to New York City someday, you can stand there too. It's very beautiful. As all the police were holding their guns at the ready with their fingers on the triggers, and the firemen were clutching their hatchets. But from where they stood, almost directly underneath the peach, they could not actually see the travelers on top, which makes sense, right? Because they're way at the top and the people are directly below. That makes sense. "Ahoy there!" shouted the chief of police. "Come out and show yourselves!" Suddenly, the great brown head of the centipede appeared over the side of the peach. His black eyes, as large and round as two marbles, glared down at the policeman and the firemen below. Then his monstrous, ugly face broke into a wide grin. The policemen and the firemen all started shouting at once, "Look out! It's a dragon!" I can see that. "It's not a dragon, it's a wampus. It's a gorgon. It's a sea serpent. It's a proc. It's a manticore." 3 firemen and 5 policemen fainted and had to be carried away. "It's a Wangler, Wanger," cried the chief of police. "It's a wangdoodle." Now Roald Dahl is making up words, isn't he? Yelled the head of the fire department. The centipede kept on grinning. He seemed to be enjoying enormously the commotion he was causing. Of course he was. He's such a rascal. "Now see here," shouted the chief of police, cupping his hands to his mouth. "You listen to me. I want you to tell me exactly where you came from." "We've come from thousands of miles away," the centipede shouted back, grinning more broadly than ever and showing his brown teeth. Ooh. "There you are," cried the chief of police. "I told you they came from Mars." I guess you're right, said the head of the fire department. At this point, the old green grasshopper poked his huge green head over the side of the peach alongside Centipede's. 6 more strong men fainted when they saw him. That one's an oink, screamed the head of the fire department. I just know it's an oink. Or a cockatrice, yelled the chief of police. Stand back, men. It may jump on us at any moment. What on earth are they talking about? The old green grasshopper said to the centipede. Search me, the centipede answered, but they do seem to be in an awful stew about something. Then Miss Spider's large, black, murderous looking head, which to a stranger was probably the most terrifying of all, appeared next to Grasshopper's. Now, in this book, the illustrations of Miss Spider are quite delightful, but you know a real spider has 8 eyes, and perhaps she had a very shiny black head, and perhaps she had fangs. That would not be a pleasant thing to see off the edge of this peach. Snakes and ladders, yelled the fire department. We are finished now. It's a giant scorpula. It's worse than that, cried the chief of police. It's a venomous nid. Oh, just look at its vermicious, gruesome face. Is that the kind that eats fully grown men for breakfast? The head of the fire department asked, growing white as a sheet. I'm afraid it is, the chief of police answered. Oh, please, why doesn't someone get us down from here? Miss Spider called out. It's making me giddy. This could be a trick, said the head of the fire department. Don't make any moves until I say. They've probably got space guns, muttered the chief of police. But we've got to do something, the head of the fire department announced grimly. About 5 million people are standing here on the streets looking at us. Then why don't you put up a ladder? The chief of police asked him. I'll stand at the bottom and hold it steady. Do you think there's a ladder that's... How tall was the Empire State Building? 1,250 feet tall? I don't think so. Let's see. Thank you very much, snapped the head of the fire department. He was being sarcastic, wasn't he? Because there is no ladder that is that tall. Soon there were no less than 7 large, fantastic faces peering down over the side of the peach. The centipedes, the old green grasshoppers, Miss Spiders, the earthworms, the ladybugs, the silkworms, and the glowworms. And a sort of panic was beginning to break out amongst the firemen and the policemen on the rooftop. Then all at once the panic stopped, and a great gasp of astonishment went all around. For now a small boy was seen to be standing up there beside the other creatures. His hair was blowing in the wind, and he was laughing and waving and calling out to everybody, "Hello, everybody, hello!" For a few moments the men below just stood, stared, and gaped. Gaped is like this. They simply could not believe their eyes. Bless my soul, cried the head of the fire department, going red in the face. It really is a little boy, isn't it? Don't be frightened of us, please, James called out. We're so glad to be here. Here are some of the members of the fire department passed out, or perhaps that's the police department, passed out on the ground. What about those others beside you? Shouted the chief of police. Are any of them dangerous? Of course they're not dangerous, James answered. They're the nicest creatures in the world. Allow me to introduce them to you one by one, and I'm sure you will believe me. My friends, this is Centipede, and let me make it known he is sweet and gentle, that, although he's overgrown, the Queen of Spain again and again has summoned him by phone. Do you think that's true? Did the Queen of Spain call him all the time? I don't think so. To babysit, and sing and knit, and be a chaperone, like on a field trip. When nurse is off and all the royal children are alone, small wonder, said a fireman, they're no longer on the throne. He is teasing that it's no wonder that the king and queen of Spain are no longer in charge if they would let Centipede babysit. I think James is making up some funny little songs. Perhaps he's learned from Centipede. The earthworm, on the other hand, said James, beginning to expand, is great for digging up the land and making old soils newer. Moreover, you should understand he would be absolutely grand for digging subway tunnels and making you a sewer. That's a good point. The earthworm blushed and beamed with pride. Miss Spider clapped and cheered and cried. Could any words be truer? So here are the 2 creatures about whom he was speaking. There is Centipede smiling. There's Earthworm with his glasses, because remember, he can't see. He just wears them for decoration, I think. And the grasshopper, ladies and gents, is a boon in millions and millions of ways. You have only to ask him to give you a tune, and he plays and he plays and he plays. As a toy for your children, he's perfectly sweet. There's nothing so good in the shops. You only have to tickle the toes of his feet, and he hops and he hops and he hops. He can't be very fierce, exclaimed the head of all the cops. And now, without excuse, I'd like to introduce this charming glowworm, lover of simplicity. She is easy to install on your ceiling or your wall. And although this smacks of eccentricity, it's really rather clever, for thereafter you will never, never, never have the slightest need for using electricity. At which no less than 52 police cried, if this is true, that creature will get some fabulous publicity. So if she provides electricity for free, she is going to get in all the newspapers. Everyone is going to want to know who she is, and everyone is going to want one on their ceiling too. And here we have Miss Spider with a mile of thread inside her, who has personally requested me to say that she's never met Miss Muffet on her charming little tuffet. If she had, she'd not have frightened her away. Should her looks sometimes alarm you, then I don't think it would harm you to repeat at least 100 times a day, I must never kill a spider. I must only help and guide her, and invite her to the nursery to play. The police all nodded slightly, and the fireman smiled politely, and about a dozen people cried, "Hooray!" Let's take a look at those illustrations that Quentin Blake made of these animals. There at the top is the grasshopper, and down below is the glowworm. And over here is Miss Spider. She doesn't look very frightening there, does she? Here we go. And here's my darling ladybug, so beautiful, so kind. My greatest comfort since this trip began. She has 400 children and she's left them all behind. There's a little nursery rhyme about that. You could look it up. The nursery rhyme about the ladybug. But they're coming on the next peach if they can. The cops cried, she's entrancing. All the firemen started dancing, and the crowds all started cheering to a man. I don't know what that means. Maybe it's an old-fashioned saying. And now the silkworm, James went on, whose silk will bear comparison with all the greatest silks there are in Rome and Philadelphia. I don't think of silk as coming from Rome and Philadelphia, but I mean, certainly there are silk clothes sold there. If you would search the whole world through, from Paraguay to Timbuktu, I don't think you would find one bit of silk that could compare with it. Even the shops in Singapore don't have the stuff. And what is more, this silkworm had, I'll have you know, the honor not so long ago to spin and weave and sew and press the Queen of England's wedding dress. I don't think that we learned that about silkworm, but that's kind of funny. And she's already made and sent a waistcoat for your president. Well, good for her, the cops cried out, and all at once a mighty shout went up around the Empire State. Let's get them down at once. Why wait? Here is Ladybug. You'll see Ladybug on one side, and on the side with the shorter amount of writing, you'll see the silkworm. Here we go. Let's see if they get them down. Chapter 38. 5 minutes later, they were all safely down, and James was excitedly telling his story to a group of flabbergasted officials. And suddenly, everyone who had come over to the peach was a hero. They were all escorted to the steps of the city hall where the mayor of New York made a speech and a welcome. And while he was doing this, 100 steeplejacks, armed with ropes and ladders and pulleys, swarmed up to the top of the Empire State Building and lifted the giant peach off the spike and lowered it to the ground. Then the mayor shouted, we must now have a ticker-tape parade for all our wonderful visitors. A ticker-tape parade, during that type of parade, they throw like slices of paper down on the ground. And so a procession was formed. That's a parade. And in the leading car, which was an enormous open limousine, sat James and all his friends. What a nice way for him to come to America. Next came the giant peach itself. Men with cranes and hooks had quickly hoisted it onto a very large truck, and there it sat now, looking just as huge and proud and brave as ever. There was, of course, a bit of a hole at the bottom of it where the spike of the Empire State Building had gone in, but who cared about that? Or indeed about the peach juice that was dripping out a bit onto the street? Behind the peach, skidding about all over the place in the peach juice, came the mayor's limousine. And behind the mayor's limousine came about 20 other limousines carrying all the important people of the city. And the crowds went wild with excitement. They leaned out of the windows of the skyscrapers, cheering and yelling and screaming and clapping and throwing bits of white paper and ticker tape. And James and his friends stood up in their car and waved back at them as they went by. Then a rather curious thing happened. The procession was slowly moving along Fifth Avenue when suddenly a little girl in a red dress ran out from the crowd and shouted, "Oh, James, James, could I please just have a tiny bit of your marvelous peach?" Excuse me, friends. "Help yourself," James shouted back. "Eat all you want. It won't keep forever anyway." No sooner had he said this than about 50 other children exploded out of the crowd and came running onto the street. How do you think James feels about that? Do you remember the old James? The James that was stuck in England with his terrible Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker. They wouldn't let him have any friends over. How happy he must be. The children jumped all over the truck and swarmed around like ants all over the giant peach, eating and eating to their heart's content. And as the news of what was happening spread quickly from street to street, more and more boys and girls came running in from all directions to join the feast. Soon there was a trail of children a mile long chasing after the peach as it proceeded slowly up Fifth Avenue. Really, it was a fantastic sight. To some people, it looked as though the Pied Piper of Hamelin had suddenly descended upon New York. And to James, who had never dreamed that there could be so many children in all the world, to him it was the most marvelous thing that had ever happened. By the time the procession was over, the whole gigantic fruit had been completely eaten up, and only the big brown stone in the middle, licked clean and shiny by 10,000 eager little tongues, was left standing on the truck. Oh my. I have to show you this illustration. It's so delightful. Look how big that peach is in the truck. And do you see the limousine with all the friends? And do you see the little girl rushing out to meet James and to ask him if she could please have a little bite? What a charming illustration. Chapter 39. And thus the journey ended, but the travelers lived on. Every one of them became rich and successful in this new country. The centipede was made vice president in charge of sales of a high-class firm of boot and shoe manufacturers. That makes sense that he would work for a shoe company. He loved shoes so much. The earthworm with his lovely pink skin was employed by a company that made women's face creams to speak. This is just so absurd. Roald Dahl is so silly. To speak commercials on television. The silkworm and Miss Spider, after they had both been taught to make nylon thread instead of silk, set up a factory together and they made ropes for tightrope walkers. The glowworm became the light inside the torch of the Statue of Liberty, and thus saved a grateful city from having to pay a huge electricity bill every year. The old green grasshopper became a member of the New York Symphony Orchestra, where his playing was greatly admired. The ladybug, who had been haunted all her life by the fear that her house was on fire and her children all gone, that's the nursery rhyme I was telling you about, married the head of the fire department and lived happily ever after. Well, she certainly would be safe if she married the head of the fire department. And as for the enormous peach stone, which is, of course, the seed of the peach, it was set up permanently in a place of honor in Central Park and became a famous monument. But it was not only a famous monument, it was also a famous house. And inside that house lived a famous person, James Henry Trotter himself. Here he is at his house. Do you see him greeting his friends at the bottom of at the top of the stairway? Oh, how happy he would be. Someday when you go to Central Park, you will see what a beautiful place it would be to live. And if you go there, and if you go in the springtime, you should go to the lake and ride in a rowboat. It's the most lovely experience. And maybe you'll see James Henry Trotter there. And all you have to do any day of the week is go and knock upon the door, and the door would always be open to you. And you would always be asked to come inside and see the famous room where James had first met his friends. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you would find the old green grasshopper in there as well, resting peacefully in a chair before the fire. Or perhaps it would be the ladybug who had dropped in for a cup of tea and a gossip. That's cute. Or the centipede to show off a new batch of particularly elegant boots that he had just acquired. Every day of the week, hundreds and hundreds of children from far and near came pouring into the city to see the marvelous peach stone in the park. And James Henry Trotter, who once, if you can remember, had been the saddest and the loneliest little boy you could find, now had all the friends and the playmates in the world. And because so many of them were always begging to tell and tell again the story of his adventures on the peach, he thought it would be nice if one day he sat down and wrote a book. And he did. And that is what you have just finished reading. Here he is holding the cover. Doesn't he look happy? It makes me so happy how his life changed from from such terrible circumstances to such lovely and happy ones. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.